Welcome to the fish tank.
Hey everybody, Fishman here. Welcome to another viewer request video. This one has to deal yet again with microworms. I wasn't really expecting a whole lot of these when I first started this series, but it's all entirely up to you guys. This one relates to whether or not you can grow microworms on bread. Specifically, it was whole wheat bread, but this is actually rye bread. It happens to be what I had on hand. And this is 24 hours after I had inoculated the bread with yeast water and worms. Now, if you remember from the last viewer request video when I was drying worms out to see if you can mail them, this is the reason why I decided to use bread instead of using oatmeal like I always do. Because it's very easy to start up. All you do is take a slice of bread, cut it to the shape or size of what you have, container-wise, pour some yeast water on it, inoculate with worms, and you're off to the races. The downside is you can see how sloppy they are. It's just like soup. And because there's so much liquid there, you don't really get as much climbing up the sides. But this is only 48 hours, 2 days after I inoculated it, and that is a substantial amount of growth. More so than oatmeal, actually. And another positive note between the two is I found that using bread instead of oatmeal smells less. But that's only, I think, in the short term. I'm pretty sure that the smell of these things is related to how much metabolism you're getting. So the more worms you produce, the stinkier it gets. So in an attempt to dry this out, so to give it a better chance for the worms to climb up the sides, all I did is take 2 discs of oatmeal and just squish them down into the worms and let it sit for 24 hours. Now the bread did absorb an awful lot of the moisture, which is what I intended it to do. And you can see the worms are now crawling over the bread on top as well. And also, more importantly, they're beginning to climb up the sides. Now, not so much on this one. Oh, actually, there it is. A little bit on there as well. And that is the entire point. If you can't get them to climb up the sides, then when you go to feed the babies or whatever fry you're feeding, you end up with media in there, and then that's just not good. So this is another 24 hours further into it, and you can see now we're actually getting good climbing up the sides. This is actually where I would consider a culture is sufficiently active enough that you can actually start getting worms out of it. So this is 3 days plus a bit. I think I actually missed a day in there when I was doing the other recordings, so I wasn't recording this one as accurately because I wasn't really worried about the timeline as much. So this may actually be 4 days, which is pretty much in line with what would happen with oatmeal. And the smell is still actually quite reasonable. And as you can see, it's a little less sloppy now. And like I said, at this point I was thinking to myself that this might be a viable way of actually culturing them, like for myself, like for my own production of them. I go through an awful lot of microworms, and this is getting to the point where, well, this is maybe enough. So I was thinking I might do is upgrade this to the larger containers that I use. But first I'm going to do a harvesting here, and then before I get any requests for other methods of culturing microworms, any starch source will do. I've heard of people, originally the ones I did was with potatoes, and I use oatmeal. This is rye bread, whole wheat bread, pumpernickel, any kind of bread at all will do. And also, recently I've seen some videos where people use Rice Krispies. Now, any of that will do, because what you're doing, the media you're using is just a food source for the yeast. So anything that yeast will grow on, and this is baker's yeast, so any form of starch is all you need. And then there you go. You'll have lots of yeast, and that will give you lots of worms. So there we have a good harvest. It's not really a lot. So then what I'm going to do is I was thinking I would upgrade it to a larger square container. This is I think another 2 or 3 days further on. You can see I've added more bread to it. I'm basically trying to see how difficult this is to maintain. Because setting it up is a breeze. All you do is take a slice of bread and yeast water and culture media, and it takes like 2 seconds. Now, maintaining it. When you do the oatmeal version, I usually boil a small amount of water, bring it to boil, I should say, and then I just dump in the oatmeal, quick oats, and then stir it for a few seconds, take it off, let it cool for a few minutes, allow the oatmeal to absorb a fair amount of that until I get a reasonable paste, and then I just spread it in the bottom and use a fork to move it around, and then that's it. Well, I just add the culture again with yeast water and culture media. Or in some cases, what I do is I just harvest worms, like you see over on the left there, and then I just add yeast to that, and then to spread it all over. It's not harder. It does take a few extra minutes longer, but I wanted to, go the full route with this thing. I wanted to see, this is how easy this is to set up. All you do is you just take a piece of bread, and in this case, a couple of crusts and whatnot, and just put water in it. And then it's very straightforward, very fast, very easy to set up. Now, as this ran, the problem with the larger version of this is it's much harder to maintain, or I should say, not so much maintain, but regulate the amount of moisture involved here. With the oatmeal, it's very easy. You just have, all it is just a skin of just active media just on the top. And because there's very little way that they can permeate into the oatmeal very well, because it's pasty, it's all on the surface, and then they run out of room pretty fast and they climb up the sides. So it's actually very straightforward to, you don't do anything to regulate it. Once it's set up and running, I let it run 2 weeks, and then what I do is once it gets to the point where it's too smelly, then I stop worrying about it. I just culture a new one and off we go. Now this one, not so simple. I ran it for a little while, and you're going to see here shortly. This is not very much longer after I set it up. I think it was a couple of days. But the moisture level is just way too high. There's just too much room for the worms to find a spot where they can just, swim. And then they don't have to go up the sides as much. And then that's obviously detrimental for harvesting, because you could have millions of worms in here. It's just not going to ever get to the point where you can scrape them off the sides. So I thought I'd give it one more go. What I did is I added bread to this, and I'm trying to get it to thicken up. The smaller ones are fine. You can get that to go pretty fast. These ones, it didn't never worked out. The metabolism of the worms or whatever, the amount of moisture that was created, it was never to the point where it was not soupy. And because it was soupy, I couldn't get as much a harvest out of it. And eventually, this also started to smell. But then again, that depends upon your nose. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you like this style of video, please like and subscribe. You can see it's like it's very moisty. And also, the other thing I noticed with this particular way of doing it is you end up with an awful lot more mold growing on the surface. Because there's more liquid, the worms can't turn over the surface as much. And I was getting some mold growing in that. So if you're mold sensitive, this is definitely not the way to do it for you. Now, the smaller ones, like if you have a small fish room and you don't really require a lot of worms, you can use the smaller containers, like the yogurt containers I was using there. They're fine. I actually found it much simpler. You don't obviously get as much as a harvest. But one thing I have noticed about it, though, is these cultures are still going. So because the metabolism is slower, you don't get as many worms, they last longer. So maybe that's a pro for you. So after about a month of this is what I ended up with. I tried regulating it for a while, and then I said, just forget it. All I'm going to do is just let it sit and see how it matures on its own. And you can see it is very, very liquidy. I'm still getting some worm production. You can see it going up the sides here. The reason why they go up the sides at this point is because with the scum on the surface, there's just a low oxygen environment below, and also the metabolism of the worms produces a little bit of toxin. So they tend to try to get away from that. So anyway, I think I've beaten this to death. I don't think there's really anything else to say about microworm cultures. There is one more one I'm going to do because someone asked actually an interesting question whether or not you could mail these at this time of year in the north where it's freezing. So I will do one more. And then I think I'm going to do a test. I'm going to offer anyone who wants the cultures, I'm going to send them out to them, and we can see how it works in the real world environment. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.